The War of 1812, a story of nationhood, battles, and memories. This narrative is proudly brought to you by Polly Speaks For You. At Polly Speaks For You, we are committed to empowering individuals, especially those with disabilities or learning challenges, through innovative text-to-speech and voice recognition technology. Polly Speaks For You is more than just software. It's a tool for self-expression, connecting people with the world in meaningful ways. By blending the richness of history with cutting-edge technology, Polly Speaks For You demonstrates that every voice, whether preserving the past or shaping the future, has the potential to inspire. While we strive to make the story engaging, our primary focus is on storytelling itself. The visuals are secondary. We're showcasing the remarkable capabilities of text-to-speech software that bring these stories to life. June 18, 1812, the Declaration of War. It was a hot, humid day in Washington, D.C. when the decision was made. President James Madison, solemn and reluctant, sat in his office, the air thick with tension. Outside, the shouts of angry congressmen could be heard through the windows as they debated the merits of going to war with Great Britain. But the decision had already been made. Madison picked up his quill and, with a shaky hand, signed the declaration that would officially plunge the United States into war. It was a war most had not anticipated, and fewer still believed the fledgling republic was ready for. "I fear what may come of this," Madison wrote in his private diary that evening. "But the voices calling for action have grown too loud to ignore. Our nation's honor must be defended, though my heart aches for what may befall us." As the ink dried, America, just a generation removed from its birth, would once again challenge the greatest naval power the world had ever known. The failed invasion of Canada, a soldier's reminiscence. August 16, 1812, near Detroit. Sergeant Daniel Walker had always considered himself a loyal patriot, but as he marched alongside his fellow soldiers toward the Canadian border, doubts began to creep in. The rumblings of dissent among the ranks were hard to ignore. They had been promised glory, easy victory, and the spoils of war in the form of British-held Canada. But now, as they neared the town of Sandwich, modern-day Windsor, the reality of their situation became clear. They were ill-prepared, ill-supplied, and facing a far more organized enemy than they had anticipated. The sun had barely risen when word spread through the ranks like wildfire. General Hull had surrendered Detroit without firing a single shot. "I couldn't believe it," Walker would later recall in a letter to his wife. "We had barely crossed the river, our guns still primed for battle, when the white flag went up. We didn't even have a chance to prove ourselves. General Hull surrendered us, the whole of Detroit, to the British without so much as a musket report. We were humiliated before we could even fight." The surrender of Detroit was a catastrophic blow to American morale. British forces, led by General Isaac Brock, had joined forces with Shawnee leader Tecumseh, and their alliance proved formidable. General Hull, fearing a massacre and underestimating the strength of his own forces, made the decision to surrender the fort and city of Detroit, handing over a critical position without resistance. Years later, in the twilight of his life, Walker would sit by the fire, telling the tale of that surrender to his grandchildren. His eyes, glazed with age, would still carry a glimmer of shame. "I'll never forget the sound of the British drums as they marched into the city. They weren't just taking a fort, or even a city. They were taking our pride." The Battle of Lake Erie, Captain Perry's diary entry. September 10, 1813, Lake Erie. From the deck of the USS Lawrence, Oliver Hazard Perry surveyed the waters of Lake Erie, the wind ruffling his dark hair as he considered his options. The British fleet loomed in the distance, their ships bristling with cannons, and Perry knew that this would be no easy fight. But the stakes were high. Control of the Great Lakes meant control of the war in the Northwest, and Perry had no intention of surrendering that advantage. "Today is the day," he wrote hastily in his journal just before battle. "We either secure victory here, or our cause in the West will falter. The enemy seems confident, but they do not know the spirit that burns in these men. I have every faith we will send the British reeling back to their ports. God willing, we shall prevail." The Battle of Lake Erie began in earnest, and chaos soon engulfed the waters. British and American ships exchanged thunderous broadsides, the sound of cannon fire echoing across the lake. The Lawrence took the brunt of the assault, riddled with holes, its deck slick with blood as sailors fell one after another. At one point, the Lawrence was nearly destroyed. Perry, undeterred, refused to give in. In a daring and now legendary move, he transferred his flag to the USS Niagara, rowing through open water under heavy fire. With the Niagara now his flagship, he turned the tide of the battle. "Victory was within our grasp," he later wrote in his journal, "and so we pressed on. I could feel the swell of determination in every man on board, and when the smoke cleared, the British fleet lay in ruin. We had done it." Perry's famous dispatch would be etched in American history. "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." The American victory at Lake Erie secured control of the Great Lakes, forcing the British to retreat and giving the United States a crucial advantage in the region. The burning of Washington. An eyewitness account. August 24, 1814, Washington, D.C. In the chaos of the British assault on Washington, 14-year-old Caroline Johnson huddled with her family in a cellar on the outskirts of the city. Her father had served in the Continental Army during the Revolution, and now, in his old age, he clung to his musket once more, determined to protect his family. But there was little they could do as British soldiers marched unopposed into the nation's capital. "I remember the smell of smoke most of all," Caroline would later write in her diary. "It filled the air, thick and choking, as if the whole world was burning. We could hear the soldiers shouting, their boots stomping through the streets. And then, like the crack of thunder, came the flames." The British, in retaliation for the American attack on York, modern-day Toronto, set fire to Washington. The Capitol, the Treasury, and most famously, the White House, were reduced to smoldering ruins. First Lady Dolly Madison had fled just hours earlier, carrying with her the famous portrait of George Washington. Caroline and her family crept out of their cellar as the sun began to rise, casting an eerie glow over the destroyed city. "We stood on the hill and watched the White House burn," she wrote. "It was as if the heart of our nation had been ripped from its chest." The Battle of New Orleans. Andrew Jackson's letter. January 8, 1815, New Orleans. General Andrew Jackson was not a man easily cowed. His piercing eyes scanned the horizon as the British forces, seasoned veterans of the Napoleonic Wars, marched toward his entrenched position at New Orleans. The stakes could not have been higher. Control of the vital Mississippi River hung in the balance, and Jackson knew that a British victory here could unravel everything. "We are outnumbered," he admitted in a letter to his wife, Rachel, the night before the battle. "But these men, these ragged, untrained men of mine, they are filled with a fire I have not seen before. We are fighting for our homes, for our very way of life. I swear, by God Almighty, we will send these British back where they came from." The next day, Jackson's army, made up of a hodgepodge of regular soldiers, militia, frontiersmen, free African Americans, and even pirates, stood their ground behind hastily erected barricades. The British, confident in their numbers and discipline, launched a full frontal assault. But Jackson's men, hidden behind earthworks, unleashed a devastating barrage of musket and cannon fire. As the British ranks fell, wave after wave, Jackson stood unshaken, his hand gripping his saber. "Stand firm," he bellowed. "Give them hell." By the end of the battle, the British had lost over 2,000 men, while American casualties numbered fewer than 100. It was a stunning, overwhelming victory for Jackson, who would go on to become a national hero. Epilogue. The Treaty of Ghent. Unbeknownst to Jackson and his men, peace had already been secured. On December 24, 1814, American and British diplomats had signed the Treaty of Ghent in Belgium, ending the war and restoring the pre-war boundaries. No territory was gained or lost, and the issues of impressment and trade rights were quietly abandoned with the end of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. The war had been fought to a bloody stalemate, but it left an indelible mark on both nations. For the United States, the war bolstered national pride, gave rise to new heroes like Jackson and Perry, and ultimately confirmed the nation's sovereignty. The flames of Washington may have left scars, but out of the ashes arose a sense of unity that would drive America forward. And so the War of 1812, though often forgotten, became a chapter in the story of a young nation still finding its place in the world. Its echoes would linger for generations in the diaries of soldiers, the memories of children like Caroline, and the haunting melodies of the Star-Spangled Banner, pinned in the heat of battle as Fort McHenry stood defiant. If you're enjoying this story, please remember to hit like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue creating content that educates and empowers. To learn more about South Africa's leading accessibility software and to support our dyslexic-friendly initiative, visit www.polispeaks4u.co.za. Drop a comment if you want more information. Thank you for watching this video.